Richard Belzer's former home sits quietly in the south of France, in a hillside village near Beaulieu-sur-Mer, where the Mediterranean light hits the old stone walls in a way that makes everything look like a painting. It's a secluded property, nestled behind thick olive trees, with wrought-iron gates that creak loudly when disturbed. The estate was peaceful. For a time. In 2023, shortly after Belzer's passing, the house was quietly listed off-market. A couple from Toronto, Noah and Elise Granger, both in their early 40s, had been looking to start a new chapter. Noah, a television producer burnt out from city deadlines, and Elise, a photographer recovering from a series of miscarriages, dreamed of somewhere slower, warmer, and older than time. The villa was exactly that. Stone floors, arched windows, a wide terrace that overlooked the sea, and quiet, the kind of quiet that felt almost deliberate. They moved in that fall. The first few weeks were blissful. Elise set up her darkroom in what had once been Belzer's writing study. Noah worked remotely, often reading through Belzer's collection of conspiracy theory books left behind in a small glass-fronted cabinet. They joked about the house being haunted the way old houses creaked in the wind, or how sometimes the bells in the nearby chapel rang at odd hours. But the jokes stopped in late October. It began with Elise's photographs. She had taken a series of self-portraits in the mirror of the upstairs bedroom, a room that had reportedly been Belzer's preferred spot for naps. In the contact sheet, one photo stood out. Her reflection looked off. Elise's face was calm, but in the mirror, her expression was twisted, her mouth slightly open as if caught mid-sentence. And behind her, near the closet, was a tall, thin silhouette in shadow, just outside the line of natural light. She hadn't seen anyone there. Noah brushed it off. Double exposure, maybe, but Elise stopped using that room for photos. Days later, Noah started noticing things shifting. A coffee cup he always placed on the right side of the counter was now on the left. Doors left open were now closed. The radio in the kitchen turned itself on around 3 a.m., always tuned to the same old French jazz station. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud, not at first. It came like a whisper beneath sleep, a gravelly murmur, something between a joke and a warning. Noah swore it said, "They never did believe me either." Elise heard it too on a separate night, but in French. They finally confronted the locked door at the end of the hallway. It had been locked since they moved in, and the realtor claimed it was just an old storage space, probably filled with rats. When they forced it open, they found a small room painted entirely in matte black. No windows, one desk, one chair, dozens of pages pinned to the wall, notes in Belzer's handwriting, newspaper clippings, phrases like, "The stage is never empty," and "They watch when it's silent." Noah spent hours in there, staring. Elise hated it. That winter, Elise began waking up to the sound of footsteps above their bedroom. There was no upstairs. Once, she followed the sound and found herself standing outside the black room again. The door was ajar. Inside, the chair was slowly rocking back and forth. She closed it and locked it, but the next morning it was open again. The final straw came in February, nearly a year to the day since Belzer's death. Elise was alone, working in her darkroom. She stepped out for a moment and returned to find one of her negatives destroyed. It had been pierced clean through the center. Burned. The subject of the photo, a portrait of Noah, had been disfigured in the image. Someone had etched into the wall above the drying table with what looked like a nail. Still watching. Always performing. She screamed. They left the house that week. The Grangers stayed in Nice for a few weeks before quietly returning to Canada. The house remains vacant. No listings. No formal sale. A local groundskeeper reportedly checks on it once a month. He told a journalist under anonymity that the windows are often open when he arrives. And sometimes, he swears, he hears laughter echoing down the hallway as he walks to the front door. Dry, cynical laughter, the kind that used to open late-night monologues. Belzer was known for his sharp tongue, deep paranoia, and his comfort in solitude. Some say the house absorbed him, that a man who never trusted anyone may have never truly left, especially if he thought he still had something to prove. By December, the light over Beaulieu-sur-Mer had changed. It wasn't the golden, honeyed warmth that had poured into the villa back in September. Now the light felt thinner, paler. The olive trees outside their bedroom window didn't rustle in the wind so much as they shivered, and the nights began to stretch longer than they should have. Noah started spending more time inside Belzer's black room. It had become an obsession, not frantic, not dramatic but slow, creeping, patient, like watching someone slowly become absorbed into wallpaper. He had pulled the chair directly beneath the wall of clippings and notes, and every morning he'd return with a different one in his hands. They were yellowed, some stained with thumbprints. A few were just loose phrases written in capital letters. Don't look when it gets quiet. They respond to curiosity. Your laughter isn't yours. Elise found him sitting there once with a Polaroid photo in his lap, a picture of the same room. But it was empty, and the lighting in the image didn't match the time of day. Noah didn't speak when she entered. He just held the photo up like it explained something important, then turned it face down. Later that week, Elise noticed his behavior changing. He had stopped shaving, stopped answering messages. When she asked if he was sleeping, he just said, "I dream better when I'm awake." She didn't like that answer. One evening, while cleaning the shelves in the back hallway, Elise felt a sudden drop in temperature. It was like stepping into a cave, a pocket of air that didn't belong in the house. The hallway had no open windows, no vents. She paused and held her breath. From just around the bend, beyond the bookshelf, she heard a sound. Not footsteps, more like the dragging of something soft across the stone floor, like a rug or the hem of a coat. She moved slowly, her heart rising into her throat. When she reached the end of the hallway, no one was there. But the vase that always sat on the entry table had been knocked over. Water seeped into the tile grout. The tulips were crushed under the baseboard. That night, she locked the door to the black room. By morning, it was open again. Sometime in January, Elise stopped using mirrors altogether. It wasn't a conscious decision. It happened gradually, first skipping her morning routine, then brushing her hair with the light off, then catching herself turning away from the full-length mirror in the bedroom whenever she passed. She didn't even notice until she found the bathroom cabinet mirror taped shut. 3 long strips of black masking tape, crossing over like a warning. She didn't do it. Noah said he didn't either. They left it that way. And yet once, she caught something out of the corner of her eye while walking past the darkroom. In the silver metal of the faucet, barely a reflection at all, she saw what looked like a man standing behind her. Thin, shirtless, with his head tilted slightly, as though listening. Hair fell over his eyes. When she turned, nothing was there. She didn't scream. She just left the water running and walked outside barefoot. Noah had discovered an old typewriter tucked behind one of the armoires in the back guest room. He said it was Belzer's, though Elise had never heard of the actor using one. It was a battered Olympia SM4, green metal casing, French keyboard layout. Noah began typing on it every morning. Just short phrases. The stage is still lit. Don't laugh. They don't like laughter. The shadows were here first. He never showed her the full pages. When Elise asked what he was writing, he smiled and said, "It's not mine." The house had 5 clocks when they moved in. None of them ever told the same time. The wall clock in the kitchen always ran 15 minutes fast. The grandfather clock in the entryway was frozen at 11:12. And the small gold timepiece on Belzer's desk sometimes ticked backward for several seconds before jerking forward like a skipped beat. One night, Elise noticed every clock in the house had stopped all at once at precisely 3:03 a.m. She walked room to room in silence. The second hands on each dial were frozen. No ticking. Even her phone had reset to 3:03. Noah didn't look up from the typewriter when she told him. He just said, "That's curtain call." Elise began hearing breathing at night. Not from Noah, not his soft, intermittent sleep breathing, but a different rhythm entirely. Slow, measured, like someone standing at the edge of the bed. She'd wake suddenly and feel the blanket tight against her chest. Her limbs frozen in place, her eyes wide open but unable to move. The air would feel thick, pressing down. Sometimes she'd see shapes barely outlined in the dark, not moving, not approaching, just watching. One night, she finally forced herself to speak, her throat dry, "What do you want?" A long pause followed. No movement, no wind, no sound. And then she heard the answer. A low whisper, almost disappointed. "You left the door open." February brought the Mistral winds. They curled around the coast like invisible fingers, shaking shutters and setting the trees to a low, trembling hum. The villa was built to withstand the elements' thick stone walls, steel-reinforced doors, but somehow, the cold seeped in. It wasn't the kind that came from temperature. It came from underneath the house, as if something buried had begun to rise and was cooling everything above it. Elise started sleeping in the guest room. She never explained why to Noah. He didn't ask. He had become distant, as though some part of him had gone down into the black room and hadn't returned. She kept the guest room light on at night. Always, even when she slept. But more and more, she woke to find it turned off, not burned out, just clicked off at the switch. Each time, her pulse would drum in her neck, loud and erratic, and she'd stay perfectly still, listening. On the fourth night, she heard whispering outside the door. Not words, breath shapes, as if someone were trying not to speak. Elise's phone had been glitching for weeks, but she chalked it up to rural signal interference. One morning, she checked her messages and saw a new voicemail with no caller ID. Just a number that read. She pressed play. For the first 5 seconds, there was only static. Then something under the noise, a voice. Male. Gravelly. Familiar in an uncomfortable way. Like a voice you've heard too much in your sleep. "They laughed at me too, Elise, until they started hearing the applause." Then silence. She saved the message and tried to show Noah. He refused to listen. In early February, one of the olive trees near the back terrace died overnight. Its bark split, and its leaves blackened as though scorched. The ground beneath it turned soft and wet like a sponge. Noah went to inspect it, shovel in hand. He dug for nearly an hour while Elise watched from the edge of the terrace, arms folded against her chest. The hole was barely 2 feet deep when he struck something solid. Not a rock. Wood. Thin and old. It was a small box, the kind used for letters or photographs. Noah lifted it out slowly and set it on the table. The top was scorched, the edges sealed with wax. It bore no lock, no latch, only a faint word etched by hand across the lid. Repetition. Rehearsal. Inside were several tightly folded pages. They weren't in Belzer's handwriting. They were typewritten on paper brittle with age. All were monologues. Paranoid, obsessive, spiraling speeches, the kind of material someone might write if they were preparing for a one-man show about their own breakdown. At the bottom of each was a signature. R. Belzer. Dated years before he ever moved to France. That night, Elise couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, trying to read, but the words wouldn't hold. Around 2 a.m., she heard tapping, light, but rhythmic, from the black room. Noah was asleep. She was sure of it. The tapping didn't sound like fingers or knuckles. It sounded like metal. She stood outside the black room, bare feet cold against the tile, and pressed her ear to the door. There it was, tap, tap, pause, tap. Then came a sound that wasn't tapping. It was slower, dragging, like nails being pulled across the wall. She opened the door. Noah was asleep in the chair. The desk lamp glowed faintly over his face. On the wall, the pages had begun to curl and peel away from the pinholes, as though something behind the wall had breathed out. She stepped forward and touched the plaster. It pulsed barely under her palm. Then she saw the writing. Carved faintly beneath the clippings was a sentence, like someone had scraped it with the edge of a key. "There's no such thing as an audience. Only witnesses." Noah stopped coming out during the day. He began sleeping at odd hours, muttering in his rest, sometimes laughing softly. Elise once found him walking in a slow circle in the dining room, whispering stage directions to no one. Lights down, center, quiet on the floor. His eyes were open, but glazed. When she spoke to him, he didn't seem to hear. He stopped responding to her name, only looked up when she said, "Curtain call." Then he smiled, that same strange, quiet smile. Elise avoided the mirrors. But one afternoon, with rain sliding down the windows like ink, She passed the hallway mirror and caught sight of something that made her stop cold. It wasn't her reflection that disturbed her, it was Noah's. He was standing behind her. Or at least something that looked like him. Except his eyes were too far apart. His mouth too still. She turned around. Noah wasn't there. When she looked back at the mirror, the hallway was empty. It happened 2 nights later. Elise awoke to the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Down the hall. Then an actual spotlight flickered on beneath the crack of the black room's door. Pulsed. Once. Twice. She stood, heart hammering, and stepped into the hall. Noah's voice echoed down to her, but not as Noah. It was theatrical, almost mocking. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us tonight. This evening's performance is dedicated to those who never listened. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the room was no longer empty. Chairs mismatched, antique, and cracked lined the far wall in 2 short rows. In each one sat a figure. Shadows. Shapeless. Silent. Noah stood at the desk like it was a podium, reading from one of the scripts they dug up under the olive tree. As he read, the shadows leaned forward. And Elise felt something standing just behind her, breathing down her neck. But when she turned around, there was nothing. Only the echo of applause. It rained for 4 days without stopping. The winds howled so loudly at night that Elise swore they were saying words fragmented and broken, like voices through static. The shutters on the west side of the villa had come unlatched, slamming against the stone rhythmically, and the house began to smell of wet wood and old, stagnant air. Noah didn't seem to notice. He had retreated fully into the black room. Elise tried to reach out to friends in Canada, but her phone had stopped working altogether. Her laptop couldn't connect to any network, and when she checked the old landline that had been left in the house, there was only a low hum on the line. Not static, not silence, just a hum constant, like the vibration of distant stage lights warming up before a show. On the 5th night of the storm, Elise awoke to a sound she hadn't heard before: music. Slow jazz, lilting, elegant, like something from a 1950s nightclub. It echoed faintly from the black room, where the door was now wide open, casting warm, stage-like light into the hallway. She called Noah's name once. No answer. She moved down the hall barefoot, in silence, the music growing louder with each step. When she reached the room, she stopped in the doorway and held her breath. The space had changed. The black walls now shimmered faintly, like fabric. The chairs had multiplied, forming a full audience, row after row of seated silhouettes, featureless but watching. Each one tilted slightly forward, like mannequins drawn in breathless attention. At the far end of the room, Noah stood beneath a spotlight, dressed in a rumpled suit Elise didn't recognize. He had shaved. His eyes were blackened beneath the sockets, but he looked calm. Too calm. He held a microphone, an old chrome one, with a coiled cable trailing off into the shadows, though there was no stand, no amp, just the mic. His voice echoed through the room, even though it was impossible that the space had such acoustics. "We're all grateful to be here tonight," he said, "and I want to thank the ghost of our host. This show, like all good hauntings, has been deeply misunderstood." A low chuckle rippled through the shadows, a sound like distant applause, but not from hands, from mouths. Dry, grating, open-mouthed approval. Elise stepped into the room. "Noah," she said, her voice small and breaking, "please come with me." He turned slowly, and for a moment his face changed. Just beneath the skin, his expression slipped, like a mask sliding over glass. Behind it was something else, hollow, waiting, listening. "He's not here," Noah said softly, "but I know all his lines now." Noah raised a yellowed page in one hand, the spotlight warming his face, and began reading. "Once upon a time, a man stood alone on a stage and told the truth. No one laughed, so he told the truth louder and louder, until the walls remembered his voice and the floors recorded his footsteps. And when the man left, the house kept speaking. Because the truth doesn't end when you die. It rehearses." The audience of shadows stood in unison. The applause returned, this time louder, deafening. Elise pressed her hands to her ears, backing out of the room, her breath catching in her throat. As she turned to flee, the hallway behind her was gone. In its place was blackness, an open backstage void. The next thing Elise remembered was waking up in bed. Sunlight poured through the windows. The storm had passed. The air was calm. Noah was gone. His side of the bed was untouched. The black room was sealed shut as if it had never been opened. The chairs were gone. The clippings. The desk. Even the smell was gone. She searched the house in silence. She called his name until her throat was raw. But there was no Noah. Only a thin crack in the floor beneath where the desk had once stood. She pried at it until the wood gave way, revealing a small crawlspace no more than 3 feet deep. Inside, there was only one thing, the Olympia typewriter. A new page was loaded into the carriage. She pulled it out with shaking hands and read. "And for my final act, I will become the room." Elise returned to Canada the following week. Alone. She told no one what had happened. Not the embassy. Not her family. Not even the real estate agency, who sent several messages asking if they would be keeping the property. She never answered. The house sits empty now. Locals report lights on late at night, voices echoing down the hill. Sometimes laughter, sometimes applause. But no one goes near it anymore. Not after the priest who tried to bless it was found standing in the olive grove, whispering into the dirt. When asked what he was saying, he replied, "Rehearsals never end." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.